1 week after diplomatic talks resumed between the U.S. and Cuban governments, the streets of Havana are overflowing with tourists, U.S. tourists in a lot of cases. Travel restrictions were lifted in part on January 16th, allowing U.S. citizens to fly to Cuba if they say they have a reason to be there.
Only a handful of charter flights to Cuba exist right now, so a Florida businessman is trying to make a new way for travelers to get to Cuba. Knowing he'd have to scope out the island for his new business, he decided to test the new travel changes to Cuba himself.
So what would happen if somebody tried to fly their own private plane from the U.S. from Florida, specifically to Cuba, under President Obama's new policy? Our Wink News crew was on board that first private flight to Cuba since the embargo began 54 years ago, and it picked us up right here in Southwest Florida. Wink News reporter Matt Doherty takes us on board as history is made.
Florida businessman Brian Hall made history last week. In his 1953 Beechcraft Bonanza, a plane built 8 years before the embargo began, the former Air Force pilot flew Wink News reporter Alex Schreck and me from Page Field to Havana, Cuba. It was the first private airplane flight from the U.S. to Cuba in more than 50 years. We were there as journalists, but Brian Hall was there for business.
Yeah, Cuba here on the left side.
The Jacksonville entrepreneur started a company called CubaKat, which he hopes will someday very soon ferry tourists and travelers from the U.S. to Cuba by boat. But the U.S. government won't allow it.
What's the holdup?
Well, we started, I was here first time in 2011. There's an act called the Helms-Burton Act, signed by Bill Clinton, prevents a boat that docks in, a commercial vessel that docks in Cuba from return to the U.S. for 6 months.
Hall said he's found a way around the act, but hasn't wanted to test his idea until now that he says the tide is changing.
I see new families coming here. I see people coming here, vacationers coming here, Americans coming here. You're going to see the traffic, the amount of visitors increase 4 or 5 times.
Hall spent this last week scouting out a Cuban port to dock his ferries and figuring out some of the logistics for getting his boats in the water. When does he say you'll be able to begin taking trips from Florida to Cuba on his ferries?
I hope to see the first boat in the water December 2015. You can see right here there's a cannon right behind me. We're pointing at the USA, and all this is behind us now, and I see great things happening in the future. Key West is 2.5 hours away. We can make it.
Now, Hall's been meeting with his CubaKat business partners this week as they discuss their next steps. But he's not the only one interested in traveling to Cuba with travelers by boat. Key West Express, which runs ferry trips between Fort Myers Beach and Key West, confirmed they're interested in someday providing ferry service to Cuba as well. But they did decline our request for an on-camera interview.
Matt, since this was an unusual flight,
yeah.
One-of-a-kind flight, what did Customs say when you left?
So we left out of Key West, and this was the first time that a private flight had flown out of Key West to Cuba in any of their experience, and they told us they would advise that we not bring anything back, but they said if we brought something back, we had to have a receipt. They would be happy to seize it if we did not.